Great. Hopefully no one minds that we're recording, and we'll probably share this on the ASC YouTube channel at some point. Let us know if you want to be cut out of that. We could edit you out if you like. So I will welcome Janie Sue as our guest speaker, spotlight speaker for today. She's a science writer and a natural storyteller and a communications officer at the Australian National Fabrication Facility, otherwise known as ANFF, in Melbourne. She and the team recently released a mighty and marvellous casebook, which is jam-packed with stories about material science in Australia. So I'm especially keen to chat with her about storytelling and science. Quick overview of how this session will run. There will be the first half is chats with Janie Sue, and I'll open up for a Q&A, so ask her your questions from 1:15 p.m. onwards. And then at 1:30 p.m., so halfway through the session, we will break into slightly smaller rooms. There's maybe like 2 or 3 rooms based on the numbers. And these breakout rooms will be a chance to chat with each other in a more intimate setting, and there will be some room themes. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that on the event page, but if not, that's all right. I'll stick them in the chat and you can choose what rooms to enter later on, and then we'll regroup in the final 5 minutes for any final questions and comments. But without further ado, I will jump in and ask Janie Sue a question about her current work at the ANFF. So I understand that the main function of your organization is to provide access to micro and nano fabrication equipment for Australian researchers and other people who deal with the very tiny, i.e. micro and nanotechnology. And I'm curious if you could explain, what do you do there exactly as a science communicator?
Oh, my main job is to tell the amazing stories of our clients. Our clients make things that are teeny, teeny, tiny that have major impact in our lives. So 2 reasons why I was hired and brought from overseas. The first, as she said, is our wonderful casebook, which is full of stories. This is now the 3rd casebook that I've created. We do a limited print run, and then eventually things will be put up on our website. The second reason why ANF brought me in is, in a former life, I was an associate professor of integrated science in South Korea. And so I do the technical review for the courses in our learning management system portfolio. So I'm not your typical science communicator, other than I really like science and I love lots of different kinds of science. So I came to AMP so that I could learn about nanofabrication, because that was a new area for me. I hate socials, so they're the bane of my existence. The casebook is the joy of my job.
Hang on, did you say you hate socials, as in
I hate social media.
Social media, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hate LinkedIn with a passion. We will not talk about X. As an American, I will no longer talk about X. So socials are opportunity cost for having my job.
Gotcha.
But that might put me unique among some communicators. I don't hate social media, but it's a necessary evil to what I do.
Well, I'm guessing that the absence of distraction has probably helped you to write an incredible casebook, and I have had a read through lots of the stories in there. They're fascinating. I won't talk about any specific ones, not sure how many people have seen it, but I'm curious about the story-based nature of this book, and wondering, how did this affect the way you approached the researchers that you were writing about, and what's involved in writing a good science story?
Okay. For the organization, they do have a set audience, right? A target audience. Probably the most important are officials in the Department of Education, because we are funded as one of the national infrastructure projects, meaning we provide facilities and experts to help clients do things. And we are funded through the Department of Education. So my stories are meant to attract attention and communicate the importance of that funding in the lives of Americans. University officials, business entities, node staff. So for my job, I deal with the people from a wide variety of backgrounds, really, really educated, intelligent, savvy people who may not have had science since year 10 in the Australian educational system. Mm. And so that's my official target audience for the organization. What was the second part of the question after audience?
What is involved in writing a good science story?
Oh, what is involved in writing a good science story? For me, it's about a personal connection, that stories unite us. Technical jargon does not. Technical jargon is a barrier. And when we look at storytelling, storytelling evokes emotion. So during the breakout groups, I will put a link to the Casebook PDF. But when I select a story, I think for me as a science writer, for me, it's about story selection. I do not seek stories. I'm in a very nice position in that we put out an expression of interest to our network. People respond saying that they would like me to write about them in the Casebook, and then I select. So first, it's having a good story. And the criteria I use is, why should I care? And that's me personally, why should I care? If it's a story about something I know nothing about, I'm likely to pick it. Because, again, I'm that little science geek, that little girl in West Virginia in the mountains of the eastern United States who lived a sheltered life but had books and stories that exposed me to the wider world. So, one story I'll tell real quickly came to me through the Australian Science Communicators Conference. And that was someone coming up to me from the break and saying, hey, I used ANFF facilities at ANU and I study polaritons. And I'm going, great, I have no idea what those are. Tell me more. And so I picked the story for the Casebook. So if it's an opportunity for me to learn something new, I tend to pick those stories, or something that makes me feel. I ran a story about a new gyroscope that's meant to help phones tell which way you're actually going. Well, who doesn't have the frustration of being sent in the wrong direction by your phone or automobile?
Yeah.
So I picked that one because it touched upon, hey, I hate this. This is really cool tech that might make me hate my phone less. And so if I can find a reason to care about the story, then I can write about that story.
And I can say that really worked for me when I was reading that story in your Casebook, where I was like, the minute you wrote, have you ever been annoyed by your phone not being able to know what orientation you're facing in, even if it knows where you are on the map? Like when you're driving, you want to know, do I turn right or left? And I was like, oh, I'm sold. I want to read this whole thing. Great. And I noticed as well that a lot of the Casebook stories have this environmental and sustainability focus. And I guess that's mainly because your clients are often researchers in that space. So it really feels like purposeful stories.
Well, I also have a background. One, I have a PhD in evolutionary biology and ecology. So I do have ecology training, but in my childhood, right, I grew up in a very mountainous region, lots of trees, and I was involved in an ag youth organization called 4-H. And so some of my favorite projects were walking through the forest with my father, working on my West Virginia trees project, learning how to identify trees, doing little energy projects as part of my belonging in that group. And so I do have a soft spot for those kinds of stories, but professionally, there is a need for those stories to be told. So why should I care? I should care because I personally believe that we need to save ourselves from our actions, and that technology truly may provide ways to move forward for my son's generation and the next generation. So for those stories, it just so happened that this past year, a lot of them submitted because I don't recruit stories. So
yeah, I really appreciate your positive view of technology there and your hopeful, kind of optimistic, understanding of the potential of it. So it is 1:15, and then although I have 4 more questions for you, I am going to open up to the floor and invite any questions for Janie Sue to do with science storytelling or her cool background in Korea, where she spent many years as a professor teaching science communication, or her time in the US. And if no one has questions, I will continue with mine. But yeah, any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Christian.
Earlier on in your science communication career, did you become aware of any mistakes or misconceptions you had about communication that you later corrected, and now that sticks with you to this day?
You have to understand, I have no formal training in science communication whatsoever. So I grew up in a world of stories. So that had nothing to do with science. I grew up in Appalachia, which has a very long storied history. I'm coming from Twindwee, which is the Wyandot Native American name for my hometown, cursed by the Shawnee Chief Cornstalk, stalked by the Mothman, sitting around campfires. Stories were an important part of my childhood. Books were a critical part of my childhood. Sitting my mother in a chair with me and my 3 sisters as she read us the entire Chronicles of Narnia. So I'd say stories were part of my life, science part of my life, but science communication happened more once I had to teach in South Korea, teaching international students in English. And when you have language as an absolute barrier to communication, I had to learn how to tell them science stories. Why should they care about protons, electrons, and neutrons? After 20 years, why should I care about protons, neutrons, and electrons? But if you can find a reason to care, you can tell the story. So I'm a university professor, and I'm still figuring out like the official world of science communication.
I think you're doing pretty well in it. And I have a question around the expressive body language that I'm very struck by with you. I do want to flag that if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Don't want to talk over anyone. Or you can also just butt in if you're happy to interrupt me. I am curious, and I'm curious about this expressiveness that you always bring to the table. Like every time I've talked to you, you just feel so grounded, and you have this presence, and it's a very intentional way of telling stories. And I wonder if you can share where that comes from. Was it very baked into that Appalachian childhood, and that was how your mother told stories? Or yeah.
Well, Americans from my region and in the South in particular do tend to be pretty expressive. We very much hug. So how do you greet someone? And it doesn't have to be someone you know very well. It could be someone you've just been introduced to with a hug. When you think about how we use body language, the voice is just a small part of that. So when you want to talk about people gathering around a fire, so even if someone doesn't quite, if they're trying to translate my English back and forth, right, English to Korean, Korean to English, hand gestures, explaining and matching with your words sometimes helps. Being a college professor, I was never one to stay behind the podium. I was always writing on the blackboard, drawing pictures. I'm horrid at drawing pictures. I don't know. Part of it is just, again, the importance of stories, of knowing our history, of being in a very impoverished region. And so how do you pass knowledge when you have lower literacy? Knowledge is passed through storytelling. So tales about Chief Cornstalk and why we were cursed, why the Mothman came to haunt our town. My first introduction to England and Cornwall came from Susan Cooper's series. So I don't know, part of being expressive is just from where I grew up, and that just seems natural. Now, Koreans are not expressive with their hands. And I'm not sure, how different cultures aim that, but again, communication is not just verbal, it's also visual. And trying to explain, you put this in, you connect this, the twist, that became part of my explanations of science.
Yeah, I'm guessing even if body language is not embedded into the culture in Korea much, it would have been very valuable for you to cross that language barrier. I understand you know some Korean, but are not like maybe fully fluent or native speaker level. So maybe that also brought it out.
And I do have to admit, I do have competitive speech training.
Oh,
So
cool.
in junior high and high school, that was the structure in America. Colleges are small universities in America, but I was in competitive speech, oratory, extemporaneous, impromptu speaking, and had an amazing coach. And so you start off with the formal gestures, your first point, your second point, and now in conclusion. But part of it was to teach us to move so that we did not become rigid and nervous.
Yeah.
And part of that, I was trained to lose my accent because of biases against Appalachian people in the United States. But yeah, so I can't say it wasn't encouraged. It was definitely encouraged. That again, connection to the judges. If you stand still, it really builds up the tension in a body. And so when I'm teaching communications and presentation, Korean students especially just get really, really rigid and just take a step forward, pivot, right? Use your triangle. And so part of that was from early, again, not science, it was, learning skills that I needed to move forward.
That's awesome. I have never heard of competitive speaking in Australia, and I wonder if we could squeeze you for a few more tips. I think you have
with impromptu
from there that we could
give me a random topic, and I could come up with a 6-minute talk within 6 minutes.
Oh,
so it would just be pick a topic out of an envelope, choose one of the three. You have a few minutes to jot down notes, and then you get up and speak. I remember banana was one, and I don't even remember what I made up about a banana. I made 3 points, so I had my first, second, third, and finally. So there are some things, right? But isn't storytelling that way? Right? You have a beginning, right? A story develops, and then you have some moral at the end. And so it helped to reinforce. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I do talk with my hands. I was taught to do that.
That's awesome. Yeah. If we have time later, perhaps we could give you a 6-minute presentation. But for now, Liv, I see you've got your hands up.
Hi. I just was thinking with your kind of not motto, but like what you said about why should I care? I wonder if you have some tips for for climate communications and things like that, where it's very obvious. Like, I immediately am drawn to those kind of things because I really care, and we all should care. It's very obvious why we should care. But I find people seem to tune out a lot of that kind of thing. So I wondered if you have any tips for how we know people should care, but what else can we bring to these stories to make people care or want to keep reading and not tune out?
I grew up in a region that does not acknowledge climate change and does not acknowledge evolution. Boy, was I a bad fit. I found, at least in my life, right, my parents don't have college educations, so data doesn't matter. Facts do not necessarily matter. And that's a very American perspective. America had 1 million people die in the pandemic, right? So that's one of the reasons why I like stories. So even if it weren't for climate, solar cells that you can put on a vehicle will save you gas money. So we have a client that's developing a way to embed solar panels into the hood of a car, the deck of a ship. And so even, yes, it's major to be able to produce energy and use energy at the same place. But why should they care? It will save them money at the pump. Right? Gyroscopes, I use that story because that tech was developed for satellites. Right? Big money, and they're trying to miniaturize it. So that's why I talk about GPS and phones, because everyone gets annoyed by that. Climate is a hard sell. Now in Korea, climate change was not an issue. People believed it. Didn't want to spend money on it, but the students, I didn't have to sell them that the climate was changing. Part of my job, because I did talk about solar with a friend in the US, just she was like, none of these technologies are ever going to pan out. They're not real. And I said, oh, let me give you an example. I have 3 clients. And so the story, right? Examples help. We believe anecdotes. People will believe anecdotes rather than a scientific paper. So we need to tell better stories than the other side, because the other side knows how to tell stories that don't rely on science. America's incoming president, I'm not Catholic, but I'll still do that. America's incoming president tells amazing, powerful stories, as crazy and off the rails as they are. He knows how to play a crowd and tell stories that are so untrue, but they are convincing. We need to tell better stories to get away from the scienciness of it all sometimes. And climate is critically important. But that's the thing. When my friends do not have the educational level to really understand consensus science. What's the difference between consensus and absolute? So all I can do is to tell stories, right? When we look at this island losing its coastline, when we look at flooding in Miami, the devastation in Western North Carolina, and how increased heat charges up the system. So again, the people in North Carolina are impacted. So that impact gives me a way in to talk to them. As a communicator, I've had to learn to let go of my professorness, if that makes sense. But working with students in a foreign language helped force me away from that reliance on science language. So that's the best advice I have. I think climate's a tricky one. Evolution is also a really tricky one. But again, I grew up in a region that's very hostile because evolution isn't true. Climate change is not happening. How else do I reach my parents? Telling them facts won't help. Telling them stories about things in their lives, I might be able to reach them that way.
So I guess you're really accessing like emotion there. If you can get people to emotionally invest a bit in a story, then that's more powerful. And I feel that this relates a little bit to your expressive body language, because I feel that is just instantly kind of emotion evoking if you display emotion yourself. Yeah, I'd love to emulate that and get more tips from you. It is one
Can I tell you how the true audience from what I truly want to?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, Department of Ed. Remember, my mom sat in a chair and told us stories. And then that same chair, it was the best chair in the world for a really short girl. It was just, perfect to be able to lay in that chair and open books and immerse myself in new worlds. Volume B of the World Book Encyclopedia. Right, I create this big ass casebook. This one's 52 pages. And it's handed out at a lot of locations. And I watch people when they're handed. If they open, especially if they sit down and open, I've got them. Right? I've accomplished what I wanted to do because I've brought them into my world and they become readers. So the purpose of that paper is the same thing as a gesture, as a handshake. There's still power in the printed world, in the printed word. And if I can just get you to open and start flipping, then, right? And this is something that little Janie Sue would want to sit down in a chair and just kind of snuggle in and read.
I love it.
That's my audience. Little Janie Sue is sometimes my audience.
Oh, your true audience is your little inner child. That's wonderful.